All right, my friends, welcome back to another episode of the Dental Marketing Secrets Podcast. This is episode 123, the 40-40-20 rule. I'm your host, Mark Thackeray. We're going to dive into what this rule means and really how you can apply this to your campaigns. And the whole basis for this episode is it kind of revolves around this question of why do some campaigns totally crush it while others completely flop, even though they're designed really well. So that's kind of the theme, not the theme, but that's really the impetus behind this episode, is that we're looking at what truly makes a campaign effective. And I got this rule, this 40-40-20 rule, from a legendary direct response marketer named Brian Kurtz. He's been around for a long, long time. He's phenomenal. He's really, really very, very experienced in the world of direct response. And if you're not familiar with that term, direct response is simply marketing that requires, or that not requires, but that generates a specific type of response. It's not branding. It's not things. It's designed to elicit a certain reaction from the user, from the targeted audience, right? So instead of just doing some sort of branding campaign like you'd see for someone like Coca-Cola, for example, it's much more driven to take the next step, So it's designed to get someone to raise their hand, say they're interested, to pick up the phone, to fill out a form, whatever the design call to action is. But it's all based around that response, and it's measurable. It's held accountable, and that's kind of the school of thought that I belong to, is where your marketing should be held accountable. It's like, I look at it as if it were another employee, where you monitor it and you check it and you make sure that it's producing. Otherwise you make changes, right? So what is this 40-40-20 rule? All right, so let's get into it. So essentially it's broken down into percentages of, the weight or importance of these three components. And the first one is the audience, or your list. Okay. So that's the first one. And another way to look at it is who sees your marketing, right? Who is the audience that's going to see this message, this offer? So that's 40% is your audience. Another 40% is your offer. And another way to look at it is what you're asking them to do. So we have who sees your marketing, and now what are you asking them to do? Okay. And then the final 20% is the creative, or how it looks and sounds. So how is it designed? How is it articulated? Things like that. And what's interesting is that most people spend the vast majority of the time on the creative. They think that that is the primary driver, that it carries the most weight, that it's the most important. But in reality, it is the combination of who you're messaging, who you're reaching, plus the offer that you're putting in front of them. And a classic example is, let's say you are a food vendor. Let's say you have a hot dog stand, and you're looking for, what's going to be a good situation for me? What's going to bring me the most success? Okay. And you have a hot dog stand. The best place to go, it's not necessarily to have really the best ingredients or the best process or anything like that. Really, it's about being in front of the right people at the right time. And so if you had a prime spot right next to a nightclub, as people are filtering in and out, they're hungry, and you're just right there. And it's not that you need this creative, fancy slogan or catchline or anything like that. It's just that you have the audience and you have the offer, which is food. And it's all right there. And that's an example of how this rule applies, is that it's much more important to have the right audience, the right target with the right offer, than it is a nice, polished, totally designed package. So that's one way to look at it. And like I mentioned before, the biggest challenge is that we get so hung up on how creative it has to be, has to look a certain way, it has to feel certain, and it does. It still counts for 20% in this rule, right? But the main thing to focus on, you should be spending the vast majority of your time and effort on making sure that you're hitting the right people. That's first and foremost, because if it's not the right people, then it doesn't matter how good your offer is. But then second is what is going to compel them to take action? How can I design an offer so powerful that it gets them to make a decision to do something with you, to fill out a form on your website, to pick up the phone and call and schedule an appointment? How do I compel people to do that by creating such a magnetic offer that it just makes sense, right? So those are the two things that you really need to spend your time and effort on is the list, the audience, and then looking at the offer. Okay. So some examples could be, if you're, as far as the list goes or the audience that you're targeting, bad targeting would look like anyone who's not going to be a qualified prospect or a qualified patient if they were to come in. So for a lot of offices, especially if you think of cosmetic, or you think of even orthodontics, things like that, it's going to be college students. Yes, are there exceptions to every rule? Absolutely. But I'm just saying that by and large, you're going to be much better off to focus in on those people that generally have fewer, there's less friction involved with them. There's fewer hurdles for them to overcome to come into your practice. So if it's a college student, typically they don't have a lot of disposable income to spend on cosmetic dentistry, for example. Or if someone who is in low income housing, similar situation, right? They generally don't focus as much on their oral hygiene or their oral health. They've got other issues that are probably more pressing. So, and again, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, that's the way you should look at it. So better targeting would then be obviously homeowners, your older demographics, typically, especially if you're in cosmetic, you could be looking at those that have established themselves in their career. They have a little bit more time and to spend on themselves. They're starting to, if a lot of times, moms will have spent so much time and effort on their kids. They put them first for their whole life. And now they're starting to think of themselves, which is great. So that's something that you could look at too. Higher household income. It could just be, we just ran a direct mail campaign recently, and just targeted a very specific neighborhood for that reason, because home prices were such that it would make them much more qualified and remove that financial obstacle. Not entirely, because everyone has differences. Obviously their situation is going to be somewhat different, but it just, as a whole, it's giving you a much better chance of success. Okay. Same thing if you were to go with the orthodontics example that I mentioned before. So if you have a better audience, would be someone with kids, especially kids that are kind of nearing the elementary, the middle school, junior high age. Those are typically good qualified audiences to go after. You can layer that with other things like dual income, their income level. And they could be dual income parents, dual income households. They could go to or attend a specific school district, right? Just another example too. I just had a meeting earlier this week, and they were looking at, they're an insurance-based practice. It's like, okay, well, what are the employers in our area that we're already in network with that provide insurance to their employees, and we're already in network there. So there's less friction involved. It makes it easier for the patient to come in because you're already in network. It's going to be less or no out-of-pocket expenses just to come in for a cleaning and try you out. Again, you're trying to really zone in on who's a good fit, and we've looked at this in the podcast different ways, but it's so important to take the time to figure out who is that ideal client for me. Who is that ideal patient? What do they look like? Where do they spend their time? Are they insurance based? Are they not? Where do they live? How many kids do they have? What is their, all as much information as you can gather from them. the more easier it is to design campaigns and create campaigns that are effective, that are reaching that proper audience. Okay. So another example too, if you're looking at specific use cases like Google Ads, for example, if you are someone searching cosmetic dentist near me, is a very different prospect. Their mindset's very different than someone who's searching free dental clinic, right? I mean, those are two wildly different mindsets and situations, right? I think we'd all agree we'd want to be targeting the former rather than the latter. So it's looking at this and then applying that as you work through this campaign. And it's interesting because most marketing problems are actually targeting problems. It's a mismatch between your offer and your audience. So when you get that wrong, like I mentioned before, if the audience isn't right, doesn't matter how good your offer is. Yep. So common mistakes to this, I've mentioned a few already, but targeting too broadly, no demographic filtering. And I will say there's kind of an asterisk around targeting too broadly, because as we've gotten into, you look at the evolution of advertising algorithms, Meta and Google search ads and things like that. It's been an interesting ride. For earlier, it was better, much better and much more effective in my experience if you did have a more specific target audience. So you could layer that in with specific interests or pages that they've liked or followed, and with demographic information, age, location, family, things like that. But as the algorithm has gotten better, it's been just as effective, if not more, to broaden that targeting. So when we're talking specifically of use cases, I would say that it's helpful to do your research. First and foremost, it's helpful for you to know exactly who is that ideal patient, what makes them tick, what pisses them off, what keeps them up at night, what are their dreams are, their outcomes are, what does their family situation look like, where do they live, as much information as you can, because then you can build that into the copy portion. Okay. And that can call people out to in their ads, call out the right people. But then you let the algorithm kind of do some of its magic and its dirty work to find more of the people that are most likely to respond. So it's an interesting balance there. I would say still that it is important to have some direction, because you get too broad and there's so much information that you end up spending a lot of money without too much results. So I think it's important to provide some direction and some clarity of what you're going after, but I wouldn't go super granular on some of those platforms like Meta, for example, because it does have a pretty good job once they start to understand who you're going after to find more of those type of people. So that's an interesting one. But I'd say in general, it's much better to err on the side of more specificity than it is being too broad. Another common mistake that I see is assuming that everyone is the ideal patient. And that is a glaring mistake, because that you don't want every single type of patient. We've all had those horrible experiences where it's like a nightmare, and deep down in the pit of your stomach that that person is not the right fit, but for some reason you feel obligated to see them and treat them. Maybe they were a referral from a patient or a family member, and you just think, well, I need to do this. I should do this. And so you do it. You suck it up and you take it on the chin, because oftentimes that's what ends up happening. They're not satisfied. They are constantly complaining. They're not very compliant when you tell them to do something. And you don't want more of those type of patients, period. So you have to understand where to draw that line and where you need to, and just who the type of person that you're really going after. Who can you be that dream come true scenario? Who can you create that dream come true scenario for? I remember first getting into photography business outside after college and went through this whole process. At first I was like that too. I said, oh, well, I just need business. And sometimes you're like that, right? But it's, I just took any type of photography clients, and I remember this one family, oh my word, they wanted to do this stock photo session essentially. And so they would do all these wacky poses and different different settings to try and get on stock photography photos like iStock and things like that. And you make a penny or something every time someone downloads it. But it was terrible. Like, that was just not my vision. It drained me and left me feeling so frustrated that I vowed never to do that again. And over time I developed who is my ideal client and who is not my ideal client, right? And that list, the second list, was much bigger than the first, so it's interesting. But as you go, you're going to want to really be specific with that, because then it allows you to create much more effective messaging, right? And a much more effective offer, because now you understand who it is that you're really, really trying to attract. And so you're, if it's a specific, it's not just all fish, to use the fishing analogy. You're not just trying to catch any fish, because each type of fish has a different type of bait, right? You're trying to be very specific and say, I only want to fish these type of fish. Those are the only ones I'm going to do. So now okay, this is the type of bait that they like. Same thing with your patients. Once you dial that in, you can be much more specific with your offer, and that offer is going to get those type of patients to raise their hand and say they're interested. So it's this domino effect. But that's a big problem that I see a lot of practices have, is they just assume that everyone is their ideal patient, when in reality, it is definitely not the case. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the offer, because I feel like this is the targeting. I think we understand that. That's been around a little bit longer. It's not a new topic or conversation. People recognize the need to get specific with who they're going after. But the offer is the part that I feel like most practices really miss out on. Okay. So, and this is the one where you're asking them, what are you asking them to do? And a lot of times you may have the right audience, but without the right offer, it doesn't resonate. It doesn't get them to pay attention, right? I can't remember what the latest study is, but I've heard different figures of, 5,000 to 7,000 individual advertisements are presented to us every single day. And we've gotten so used to being bombarded all the time that we automatically tune it out just so that we can function normally, unless it's something that speaks to us deep down, unless it calls out a specific pain point or a desired outcome that we have for ourselves that we've thought about or talked about recently. So that's what we're trying to do. And this is really where a lot of campaigns totally miss the mark, is that they don't have a strong enough offer to capture someone's attention and get them to take that next step. So let me give you some examples. So you have just a general call today type example. We care about our patients, now accepting new patients. Those are not very compelling offers, right? And let me give you kind of as you start to look for these things, you'll start to see them more often. I see it quite a bit on Amazon when you're searching for whatever the case may be. So I was searching for it was some type of like home projects equipment. I have just a drill and you have a blower, leaf blower, and you have all the different equipment, right? And I can't remember what I was looking for specifically, but I was on there looking at different options. And there was one option that had all the options, basically had what I needed, which was this specific tool. And it came in the same brand that I had. I wanted to keep it all in the family, so to speak. But there was one offer, and then there was another offer that had that, plus a few different accessories that I thought, oh, it's only $10 more. It's only $15 more. But the perceived value of that was so much greater than the actual difference in cost, right? And that was, to me, that's a great example of a very strong offer, where it might be the core offer might be the same as what other people are offering, but can you make it better? Can you provide even more value to the patient? Okay. So I want you to, I challenge you to start thinking in terms of how can I make this an offer that someone cannot refuse? Let's create a mafia offer. Let's make it so good that they would be stupid not to take you up on the offer. And especially when you're talking about new patients, because as we know, that's the hardest thing to do. Really, that's the biggest challenge, is to get someone who has never heard of you. It's not a referral. It's just maybe happened across your website, either through an advertisement, through a Google search, or some other form. And now they're considering coming to your practice, or at least calling or picking up the phone to call for an appointment. That's the hardest thing to do. Because once you get them in the door, once they have a chance to meet you, you build some rapport, you show off how good you are with patients, how easy and comfortable it is, your expertise, your clinical experience, then it's easy for them. Now they have some basis, they have firsthand experience. It's a lot easier for them to say yes. But when you're just trying to get them to pick up the phone and call, that's a big hurdle. So this is where that offer really comes into play. And again, you want to make it as strong as you can. And you can do this by creating what some people call a value stack, or what I like to call a value stack, actually. It's so you're stacking up all the reasons and all the value that comes with a specific offer. So that could look like something where instead of just hey, we're accepting new patients, it could be book today, schedule your first cleaning, and we'll provide you with free whitening, $20 Amazon gift card, and a bag of Cadbury mini eggs. Cadbury mini eggs. You're stacking up all the value so that when they're comparing it to, well, I could just go down to the other dentist down the road where they're offering a cleaning, or I could go to this one where I'm still getting a cleaning, but I'm also getting a gift card, whitening, and Cadbury eggs. Like, side-by-side comparison, not even close, right? And I'm speaking more specifically to those that haven't been referred, because that comes into play, certainly. But if they haven't, then you're just trying to get them to tip the scale. You're trying to tip the scales in your favor, trying to get them to see, oh man, I would be a fool not to take them up on this offer. They're offering the same thing, plus I get all these extras. No brainer, right? So I'm challenging you to think in terms of that. Think in terms of value creation. What can I do for this specific type of patient that I'm trying to attract? Could be a general new patient. It's just in for a cleaning, and something like that might work really well. It could be, if you're trying for a cosmetic case, veneers or dental implants, things like that, you might have to get creative, right? I mean, there's quite a few people offering a free implant consult. So what can you do above and beyond that? How can you strengthen that offer? Well, you could get more specific in terms of what that consult looks like. You could say, well, here's what we do. We go through this in-depth scan, which basically gives us all the bone structure and can tell us, here's what is going to be required in order to proceed with treatment, and help them understand all the benefits that come from that, even if they decide not to go forward with treatment. You're trying to help them see and build value for the reason for coming in for that implant consult. So, and that could be like, oh, and then even after the consult, we'll provide you with, maybe it's an offer for, well, if you proceed with treatment, you get $250 off or something, or we're going to provide you with a printed roadmap, just so you know, and you can always refer back to, well, here's where I am. If I want to move forward, here are my options. And you'll have that so you can make a better decision down the road. You can get pretty granular, right? And you can get pretty creative too. So the point is to, as always, look at it from put yourself in the shoes of the patient and see what would get me excited to come in. What would tip the scales in my favor to come in, or in the favor of this office for me. If I were comparing two offices, I'm looking at an implant consultation. I'm looking at possibly getting dental implants or maybe doing a bridge or something like that. What's going to make me excited to go to this office rather than this one? And be creative and try and test out a few different things, right? A lot of this comes out of testing and talking with patients. Again, if you're having those conversations and you're diligent in acquiring that information about those specific type of patients, then this part is so much easier because now you have a list of things that they don't like, things that they would die for, things that they say, that is the worst part of this experience. Now you can make something around that. You can build something around that says, and because you don't like this, this is what we're going to do. So it gives you all that ammo that you need to create a compelling offer. And it doesn't always have to be a discount, right? I try and use those quite sparingly just because you don't want to condition people into expecting a discount. However, they can be very motivational. I typically, if I do offer a discount, it's generally down the line. So it's not upfront when I'm trying to attract a new patient. It's generally after they've either taken some type of step forward, and then I might introduce a discount just to increase the urgency. Have it expire soon, but just say, hey, if you're serious about it, then I can provide this discount if you want to get started in the next 2 weeks. Something to that effect. But the main point I'm trying to make here is an offer doesn't have to include a discount, right? A great offer is something that reduces uncertainty. It lowers that friction from coming in and going forward with treatment. It increases that perceived value, and it gives a patient a reason to act now, a reason to move forward now. So one way to look at it is offer is the bridge between attention and action. Okay. So again, I challenge you to really spend some time on your offer because it carries so much weight, and a really powerful offer, you can ride that for a long time. That can serve you for sometimes years before you need to change it. But I think of in everyday life, I love pizza. I'm always thinking about food. So I thought of Little Caesars Pizza. And they were kind of struggling for market share. There's Pizza Hut, there's Domino's. Domino's had a pretty powerful USP, unique selling proposition of, hey, if you want a fresh hot pizza delivered to your house in 30 minutes or less, guaranteed, call us. That was very powerful, right? They were struggling. Little Caesars didn't know what to do. So they came up with a powerful offer. And that was the $5 pizza. $5, you can get a pepperoni, you can get a cheese pizza. Simple. It's cheap. It's easy. They can crank them out all day. And that's what they did. And it was amazing. It really gave them a huge boost financially. It simplified a lot of things for them. And now they've since, they've increased their prices, and now they're offering more things. They have more client base and stuff like that. But that's the power of a compelling offer, right? It's not that they were super creative in how they did it. It's just the offer itself was $5. I remember in college, we were I went to the University of Utah and took a ultimate Frisbee class, which is so fun. You just play Frisbee the whole time. And we would go on certain days and we'd go and play, and then we'd just go get a Little Caesars pizza and eat it all the time. And I can't tell you how many of those $5 pizzas we consumed as a family with kids and stuff like that. But that's a powerful offer, right? All right. So the last thing, again, the offer, I would say, is the most important part. Got to have the right audience, of course, but that's kind of a given. Now spend your time on creating a very compelling offer. And then the final 20% is the creative. Is how do you communicate this message? How do you articulate what it is you're trying to get them to do and the benefits associated with that action, right? So when we're talking about this, specifically, we're looking at headlines. We're looking at graphics or visuals, just body copy in general, the design, storytelling, call to action, all those types of things. Okay. And it is important. but it's not the most important. Again, I can't stress that enough, because we get so excited about how it looks and how can we just be so crafty with this message? Can we just stand out and be like, oh man, we're so creative. But that's so funny because agencies love to do that, because that's kind of the expectation. We want it to capture attention. But the biggest thing that really captures attention is, one, knowing your audience and targeting the right audience, and then having an offer that gets them to perk up. Okay. So the thing to remember with this last section is that a really well-designed piece is not going to save a weak offer. Doesn't matter how good it looks. It's not going to save a really poor offer or a weak offer, right? So one of the things that I see in this section is, and it's usually just because it's a lack of effort. People are using, when they're putting together the creative aspect and the ad itself, they're using generic stock photos because they haven't taken the time to take actual photos or track down ones that they took years and years ago. They don't understand, they haven't done their due diligence in knowing really what drives their patients and what motivates them, what wakes them up at night. And so they have vague headlines. They don't have copy that speaks to the people, that enters the conversation that's already going on in the mind of their patient. That's the goal, right? Is to call them out and basically say, it's like having a one-on-one conversation when it's done properly. People have told me, your ad, it sounded like you were in my head. It sounded like you were speaking directly to me. And that's the goal. I'm trying to do that every time. It doesn't always get there, but that's the goal. You're trying to understand your patients so well that you can articulate their situation better than they can. And then that's where this creative comes in. You take all that knowledge, you use actual photos of you and patients of the office, not generic ones that we can spot a mile away. You use very compelling headlines, not vague ones, or ones that are just lack feeling. You're trying to hook in that emotion. You want a clean design. That's also important because you want to make it easy for people to go through. Sometimes, again, that's another one that I see people get hung up on. It's like they create these websites that are, they've got this video playing, and then over here it's like this animation going, and your eyes just like, I don't even know which way to look, and you get kind of frozen, and it doesn't guide people in a logical sequence. And so people are bouncing, they're going up top, they're going down below, they're following this, and there's no real rhyme or reason other than it looks creative. And that's not a good user experience. You want to make it easy. You want to make it logical. You don't want to make them work harder than they need to go through and consume your content, your offer, right? And so that's another thing to do. And once you have all the information, you work your headlines, you've got good copy, you've got your assets like images, videos. Now you kind of work through that. How do I make this into a logical sequence? What is the natural process that people go through? Could be questions that they have. It could be, like, oh, well, I'm missing teeth. What are my options now? Well, let's consider all these different options. And then why is dental implant the best option? Just see that through a logical sequence, and then build your campaign accordingly, right? So it has to have some logic to it. And then finally, don't sound like every other office. It's easy to do the research and just create a Google sheet and just say, okay, here's my competitor down the road. Here's what they're offering. Here's their headline. Here's the exact offer they're making. And then you go and see like, okay, well, how can I make mine different? How can I make mine stand out? Now that's some things we do. That's a thing that we do with Google ads or in different, honestly, it doesn't even have to be a Google ads or Meta ads or anything like that. Sometimes we've done it on just listings where people can go and see a listing of different dentists. We'll just see, well, how can I make our profile stand out more? And it could be visual, could be words, could be whatever, but it's this intentionality behind it so that you're not cutting corners and sounding like every other office. Yeah, it takes time, but building a successful practice takes time. Everything that's truly valuable and worthwhile takes time. So don't skip that. Do your homework, know your patients, know your competitors. So anyway, so let me give you a last few things too on the creative side. I know I've been bouncing around a little bit, but it still is important. And one of what I'd say is try and include more stories whenever possible. Stories are an excellent way to hook people in emotionally and allows them to experience what you're saying, the content, consume that content in almost first person because they tend to try and place themselves in the story. Okay. Speak to outcomes, speak to results, speak to transformations instead of just talking about benefits. So transformation might include what is the emotional impact, what is the psychological impact, what is the physical or aesthetic impact. You're just presenting a case. You're trying to make an overwhelming case for why they should do this, right? So patient stories, talking about transformation, you want to be specific wherever you can. So include specificity. Got it. And such as, details about treatment. Well, generally, it typically takes this long and this long. Yeah, there's caveats to that, but you can be specific still and then mention that every case is a little bit different because they need to know. Personality. That's another thing that's important here. We're a personality-driven society. That's where we go for news. That's where we go for our sports. We've made up jobs that are just personality driven, like sports commentators that speak all day long. They have they have cable network. They have networks and they're dedicated to that 24 hours a day. It's mind boggling, right? But that's because of the personalities. They're rehashing the same things, but with different personalities and people tune in. So include some personality. Doesn't have to be outrageous, but some personality does help. It makes you so much more memorable. And then include emotional language. Anytime you can hook people in emotionally, stories are a good way to do that, but also speaking to their pain points. Again, this is where that homework really comes into play, is going to make it so much easier and much more relevant for them. So those are some different things to focus on. And that is basically that's the formula, so you've got your list or your audience, 40%, you've got your offer, 40%, and your creative, how you communicate your offer, 20%. So that's really the breakdown of a way to look at it. And again, we go through a lot of different things on this podcast. I do not expect you apply all of these. I'm just providing different resources that have helped me. And hopefully one of these will resonate with you and you can approach it that way, right? So we've talked about different ways to approach different things or different parts of your business or specific campaigns, but this is just one way that I found pretty helpful because I wasn't spending as much time on my offer, and it is really turned the corner or allowed me to turn the corner because I've spent more time creating a more powerful offer in the long run. So call to action for this episode is if you need help evaluating your audience, creating a powerful offer, a mafia offer, or messaging, we would love to help you. Reach out to our team. We'd love to set up a time to discuss more and see if we're a good fit. Just connect with my assistant, Maria. That's maria@markthackeray.com. And we can get started. And also too, if you haven't left a review for the podcast, for the show, that would be tremendously helpful. We put a lot of time into this and it's kind of a passion project, but feedback would be great. If you could just take a minute and post a review, that would be tremendous. And hope you guys have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.